Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to all who are joining from the United States. Today, we have a very critical issue together with Dr. Eric Mandel on U.S. and Turkey relations. I would like to introduce first Dr. Eric Mandel, and then we'll give the floor to him. Eric Mandel has built trust and a senior level relationship in the U.S. Congress as a result of his decades of experience traveling and building high-level relationships in the MENA nations as an advisor and a mentor to key leaders, officials, policymakers, and experts from generals to government ministers. He brings a wealth of information and a lifetime of experience to his essential work in the MENA region. And Eric is a recognized facilitator and a connector between policymakers and those with influence in the region that helps him play a unique and critical role as a bridge builder. Dr. Mandel is the director of Middle East Political Information Network and Mandel Strategies, a consulting firm for the Middle East. He regularly briefs members of the U.S. Congress and their foreign policy aides. He's a regular contributor to the U.S. political publication, The Hill, as well as the senior security editor for the Jerusalem Report. He has been published in National Interest, Masri's Foundation for Democracies, Real Clear World, National Cybersecurity News, The Messenger, MSN, Rudolph Virach, The New York Sun, Kurdistan 24 and The Thing, Defense News, and the Jerusalem Post and other publications. Yes, Eric, thank you very much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
So thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and we're certainly at a critical time. So let's get right into it. I thought what would be very good for the audience is let's look at how America views Turkey. And I thought the best way to do this is to first show you the maps that are part of the report to Congress on U.S.-Turkey relations this year from the Congressional Research Service, then talk about how Americans think President Erdogan and Turkey think of where their place is in the world today. And then we're going to get into the investment from the U.S. State Department. There's a 2023 investment climate statement on Turkey, and I think that would be very valuable. So let's start with a map of the Black Sea and the Turkish Straits. This is one of the most important geopolitical crossroads in the world. America looks at Turkey. The first thing we look at is Ukraine and Russia, which is consuming us in addition to China. We look at the Straits, Bosphorus and the Dardanelles related to Turkish warships. To the south of Turkey, you're talking about the Levant, you're talking about Israel and Lebanon and Syria. And to its east is Iran, something that is a major adversary of the United States and a major player in what things are going to happen in this region for the years going forward. Now, America, here's another map from this congressional research. America views Turkey through a security prism. And so you look here, a map of where American bases and NATO bases are. And that is a primary focus of how America views Turkey, not necessarily how Turkey wants to view itself. And related to NATO, America very much appreciated the recent deal that allowed Sweden and Finland in. Those two countries are aspiring countries. They're now in NATO. And that is, again, NATO plays into this. Turkey's role in NATO, where Turkey was, is, and what they want to be. But again, an American prism through military, through security. Next slide that they have is on Syria Conflict Map. And so where America and Turkey both agree that President Assad of Syria has committed genocide, he's had war crimes, he's had ethnic cleansing. Where America and Turkey disagree is in the north, in relation to the Kurds in the north, Turkish presence in the northwest, the Kurdish presence, and the alignment related to America's continuing fight on paper against ISIS. Next gets to energy, gets more to the business world. And America sees its allies in the region, Turkey, Israel, Cyprus, Egypt, Greece, Italy. There is conflict there. America doesn't want conflict because America would like this region to be supplying Europe with fossil fuels to decrease the European need from Russia. Now, latest news this week. So President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel is set to meet in September with President Erdogan. And this is regarding the long Turkish desire for a pipeline from Israel's largest gas field, Leviathan, directly to Turkey, which, if a pipeline is going to happen, is actually probably the most cost effective. From Israel's point of view, Israel's reserves that they have now, there's at least double that's still out there. And if Israel, if you will, gets into bed, they from their perspective, they want to know that President Erdogan will be a stable partner in the years going ahead. And it has been a rocky way in the last 20 years under President Erdogan's stewardship between the Jewish state and Turkey. And also, Jerusalem feels that it is worried about its positive relations with Cyprus and Greece going forward. But this is actually happening now. The Israeli Security Cabinet, the Israeli Energy Minister, Israel Katz, has brought this up with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and this is something on the table right now. So I said here, I wanted to just interject before I get to the State Department assessment. The American view of the Turkish view for the centennial year of which is 100 years of Turkey, modern Turkey, going forward, is that Turkey sees itself as a rising power that should take its rightful place as a global power. That Turkey doesn't view itself as Western, but as post-Western, doesn't need American or Western approval. It's not as reliant, or doesn't want to be reliant, wants to be more independent. However, there's the flip side. Turkey, when it looks at its security needs, when it looks at Russia, it looks at Iran, these are not natural allies. It wants to stay a part of NATO. It does not want to go with China and Russia in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And Turkish decisions, certainly since President Erdogan has been reelected, have shown more pragmatism, and that has the best chance of improving a relationship with the United States. So America has been encouraged by Turkish recent pivot to traditional economics. So the big news recently is the central bank had made a surprise decision going against its unconventional economics, raised its interest rates from 17.5 to 25%, and the Turkish currency rose in value 3%. So that to American investors, Wall Street, is evidence that Turkey is moving more to traditional economics. Not necessarily good in the short run for Turkish GDP. Turkish inflation, this is from 2022, takes a big bite out of the economy, but to give the bitter medicine to lower inflation, it's going to affect Turkish economics, which transitions us to the State Department's investment view of Turkey. So I broke this down first into positives and negatives. What are the positives for American investors of how Turkey treats investors into Turkey? Well, foreign direct investment treats foreign investors in Turkey same as Turkish investors, totally unlike what goes on in China. There are few restrictions in Turkey, also very positive. And the Turkish people, they are a skilled workforce. The country is in a strategic location. It has a large domestic market and favorable demographics. All positives. What are the negatives? Opaque rulemaking from an American perspective. The legislative processes in Turkey are looked at as increasing risk to investors. There's been geopolitical shocks, mainly because of Russia and energy supplies that have affected things like inflation. But the big thing that they emphasize is the export controls of Turkey and Turkish non-compliance with sanctions. This is particularly concerning for Wall Street. So let's get right to sanctions. We should discuss all of this, frankly, not skip around anything, and see how America looks at this if we want to resolve problems. In America, Democrats, Republicans, bipartisan, there is a focus on countries that do anti-circumvention, trying to get around sanctions. So America's National Defense Authorization Act and everybody knows about the Turkish purchase of the Russian S-400 system. In order for sanctions to be listed according to the National Defense Authorization Act, Turkey has to give up its S-400 missile system. According to Section 231 of the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, CATSA, they have sanctioned the presidency of Turkish defense industries because they knowingly engaged in significant transactions with Russia's main arms export entity, and has led to U.S. export licenses being banned. There's been asset freezes, visa restrictions. And from America's Office of Foreign Assets Control, there's been recently, in the last couple of months, new sanctions against Turkish businesses doing prohibited trade with Russia. Remember, there is trade that is allowed with Russia and trade that is not allowed, like dual-use technologies. So Brian Nelson, the Undersecretary of State for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, who came to Turkey this year, had warned Turkey that if they continue working too closely with Russia, they could lose access to the G7 markets. And it deals specifically with dual-use technologies that are being transferred. And the most notorious case of what's going on is the U.S. case against Halkbank for helping Iran evade sanctions. Now, for people who don't know, I just want to catch them up. We're going to have a couple of slides on this. In 2019, 3 years ago, the Department of Justice charged the bank with bank fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering because it was alleged that Halkbank helped Iran purchase gold from proceeds of oil and gas fossil fuel sales. Halkbank filed a motion to dismiss this case based upon sovereign immunity because the bank is majority held by the Turkish government. America, at a lower court, dismissed the appeal. At a higher court, the Court of Appeals also affirmed that this could go forward. And then Halkbank in 2022 petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court. President Erdogan said this was an unlawful and ugly act. So the Supreme Court has said that the prosecution for Iran sanctions violations under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act of 1976 can go ahead. Justice Kavanaugh wrote the majority opinion. He said there should be no immunity to a commercial business owned by a foreign state from criminal proceedings. Halkbank can engage in criminal conduct threatening U.S. national security while facing no criminal accountability in U.S. courts. However, they gave a pass that it could be returned to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and they could apply for sovereign immunity. They can't do it under the Foreign Sovereignties Immunity Act, but they can do it under what's called common law, regular American law. There's a good chance this case is not ending and can end up back in the Supreme Court. And this will be something that will be a problem between Turkey and the United States going forward. So why should Turkey, when you look at the economics, act soon to decrease sanctions that are against them? Even though in the second quarter, Turkish economy increased 3.8%, Reuters just reported that. A good part of that was related to election-related stimulus. And going forward, at this point, the Turkish economy is projected to slow. So any decrease in sanctions would be incredibly helpful for a slowing economy. Also, the remedy to get rid of inflation is raise interest rates. You know what that will do, at least in the short term and the medium term, to the Turkish economy. So Turkey's been looking to diversify economically. And President Erdogan went on a mission to the Gulf states to repair ties and attract foreign investment recently, and actually did very well with the United Arab Emirates. They have deals much more than was expected, hopefully for Turkey's sake. There was up to $50 billion. There's also a Turkish drone factory that's going to be built for over $3 billion. In Saudi Arabia. So remember, if nations could trust one another, whether it's America and Turkey, whether it's the Gulf and Turkey, whoever we're talking, if there is trust, deals can be made. If deals can be made, there's a potential for there to be cooperation, lower the chance for tension in the region, which is the most important thing everybody wants. Economics is a secret sauce to make that go ahead. But I believe, and I advise, that Turkey's most prosperous path still lies in going back to the West. So if you look at trade, if you look at foreign and direct investment, Russian foreign direct investment in Turkey is 3% of all FDI over a period I used between 2007 and 2015. But foreign direct investment from the EU is 73%. EU is Turkey's top trading partner. We know about the problems. I'll mention them a little later. And Turkey's exports to the US are greater than they were in Russia. Again, the West is still economically the place for Turkey. But Turkey's been sending some mixed messages. So Ankara told the European Commission that it would respect sanctions, no goods transiting to Russia that are covered by sanctions. That was in March. In April, the United States placed new sanctions on Turkish businesses who said they were violating the sanctions. Can Turkey choose? What is the path of what's going on here? President Blinken this year testified, he's saying, we don't want this relationship between America and NATO's second largest military to be transactional. We don't want to push the differences under the rug here, because then they're going to disappear, and that's an unhealthy relationship. And Blinken said, let's start with what Turkey has to deal with us. It's the S-400 system comes up again and again and again, and also how we all deal with what's going on in Syria, and that's related to Syria and related to Turkish problems with the refugees, with the Kurds, that America does not want to push this down the road, unlike what America would like to do with Iran and the nuclear deal, which I'll mention a little later. And America is also very interested in what's happening with Russia and Turkey in the Black Sea regarding grain. So President Putin and President Erdogan are supposed to meet, I think, September 4th in Sochi. And so according to Al Monitor, one of the sites that reports in this region, how Turkey views themselves is they want to be on both sides of the aisle, proactive neutrality. We know that Turkey closed the straits to Russian warships, and it sends Ukraine military supplies. It didn't join all the sanctions against Russia. And what's going to happen at this meeting, and I think this is a key geopolitical point, is President Putin wants to push Erdogan to be Eurasian and not NATO. He wants to pull Turkey away from the West. That is a major Russian policy that has been going on under President Putin for a long time. So in recent months, Ankara has been distancing itself more from Moscow, and Turkey did support Ukraine's eventual membership into NATO, and that's what led to the grain shipments being stopped. But President Erdogan, having it both ways, doesn't want to end ties with the West, but he doesn't want to end ties with Russia. He wants to have it, if you will, both ways. And from a Turkish point of view, they cannot believe to have absolute compliance with sanctions. It's not feasible being in their geopolitical area. So my bottom line, and I've touched on this to hopefully provoke some questions and discussions down the road, is I have no doubt for increased Western investment and better relations with America, Turkey needs to enforce more sanctions on Russia and Iran. We'll touch on Iran in a little bit. And the balance of Turkey needs to tilt to the West for Turkish interests. So I want to talk a little about geopolitical alignments of the Middle East when we do this in a macro sense, because all of these things interact. We can't say this Turkey, Iran, Turkey, Russia, Turkey, Israel, whatever it is, all of them interact. And there's been a profound realignment, and I'm looking here at the MENA nations. I don't have Turkey in this picture because so much has been happening south of Turkey in the relationships. But when we talk about realignments that we're still dealing with today, the one we're still dealing with is what happened in 1979 that changed the Middle East, and we are still dealing with it today. And just to say that leaders and intelligence services don't know always everything, a month before the Iranian Revolution, President Carter said, Iran is an island of stability. You can see a picture of President Carter with the Shah. This is the key event that has changed the Middle East to today. It created a cascade of events of Iranian hegemony and expansionism, wars and problems with Iran, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Iran, America. And the Saudis responded by propagating Sunni Wahhabism into the Muslim world, most evident in Pakistan. And what's happened in the 21st century has been the perceived American vacuum. America is still the largest military presence there, but the perception is America doesn't use its military presence, and the regional players think America won't use it, which makes us less effective. This has invited in American adversaries, the Chinese and Russians. They have filled the void. And this has helped Iran's resistance economy. So you have this triad that's there. So with this triad, this is a cover from the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago, that Iran, it's always been wary of Russia. It's always been wary of China. But it looks like its best bet is for its anti-resistance economy to join the anti-Western alliance. And that is what has allowed the Iranian economy to survive, although definitely not thrive. So let's take a look at what's been happening. One of the big things, the Saudis and the Iranian rapprochement with Chinese sponsorship. The Arab League is inviting back the genocidal President Assad. Russia and China are trying to sponsor Turkish-Syrian rapprochement. The UAE and Iran, with biggest trading partners, are cooperating even more. Qatar and Bahrain are restoring ties. Oman and Iran are strengthening ties. China's even said it wants to help resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And all the while, Iran is solidifying its expansionism into the Levant. So, another geopolitical earthquake, and this will directly affect, even though it seems like it's a little far away, but it'll directly affect Turkey, is right now, President Biden is working very hard, I can tell you, to create a Saudi-American-Israel deal and a normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which will change, if that does happen, will change the economics in the region, and there will be repercussions to Turkey. Will that happen? Lots of moving parts here. America is pressuring Israel to make more concessions for the Palestinians. The Saudis want a civilian nuclear program, advanced American arms, and a defense pact as close to what NATO has with Turkey, but I don't think that's necessarily possible. It would require 67 Democratic and Republican senators, and Saudi Arabia is isn't usually popular in either party. Israel wants normalization, but if it does happen, and I can tell you that the Biden administration is cautiously optimistic that this actually will happen this week. The Saudis restored money to the Palestinian Authority as a gesture in the normalization process here. Things are definitely happening. And President Biden, this is a writer for the Wall Street Journal, Walter Russell Mead, and I agree with his analysis. The Biden administration, what it was when it came in 2021, and what it is today, they have a new approach to the Middle East. Israel and Saudi Arabia are now seen as crucial to the U.S. global strategy. America is thinking again about coming back in. How much, I don't know, being a primary security and economic partner of the region. Why? Because even if America was totally independent of fossil fuels, which it could be if it chose to be, the fossil fuels of this part of the world supply 40% of the world, especially the Chinese. And America thinks that if it has more engagement there, it has more leverage over Chinese energy supplies. China is America's #1 adversary. The biggest problem of this great American strategy is Iran. Iran wants to put a thumb in the eye of America. What America might consider is actually working with the Chinese to keep the Persian Gulf open, because the Chinese need that fossil fuels. And that actually could be a way to pressure Iran. So I just want to show you where I've been recently. And this is some of the roster of meetings that I've met with my American ambassador in Qatar, also the military attaché. I was in Oman with the chargé d'affaires and the military attaché and the former U.S. ambassador to Oman. I spent time with the Israeli Foreign Ministry that deals with countries in the region, and with major generals and think tanks in and throughout the region. And so I go into the region, and that really is how I get, and I have meetings off the record. Here I am at Al Jazeera. Here I am with the Qatari ambassador to Gaza for reconstruction. I have an invitation to go to Gaza and at the American embassies with the Omani Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is one of the think tanks. This used to be called Brookings. It's now the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Again, with Omani Foreign Ministry, and this is the former American ambassador, Mark Sievers, who was on my trip. So we're going to go towards the end of the PowerPoint, and then we're going to get to questions. But let's first touch on Iran. Why does Iran want nuclear weapons? Because it makes them immune to regime change. If you ask me one magical thing that I could do that would change the region for the better, if the Iranian people could take control of their lives and there was non-kinetic regime change in Iran, and you'll say, I'll explain what that means in a second, the region would be profoundly better from Western interests, and I actually believe from Turkish interests. There's a Kennedy School of Government study showing that most regime changes in the world occur without fighting, and they need 3.5% of a population for that to happen. And I think America should be on the side of Iran. The side of Iran is the Iranian people. What has it been doing in 2023? Iran has gotten to 84% enrichment of uranium, one of the ways for nuclear weapons. The other way is plutonium. They've increased their centrifuges, their enrichment sites. Key part here, they've transferred highly enriched uranium capable of turning it into uranium hexafluoride from a gas into a metal. This is a key part of weaponization, and IAE inspectors have not been allowed in, and they've never been allowed into the places where they're really doing the work in military sites. Just wanted to show you some pictures of what they have in their underground tunnels. So if you think about preemptive attacks, look at the size of this tunnel, look at the size of the missiles, look how far back it goes. So if you want to know a key thing about Iran, there are three parts to a nuclear weapon. Enrichment. Iranians have the knowledge. They have enough within a few weeks of enriched uranium to have a bomb, multiple bombs in weeks. Iran has ballistic missiles. They could hit any place in Europe. What they don't have yet is the weaponization, turning the gas into metals and compartmentalizing and detonating it. They are 18 to 36 months away from that. So beyond nuclear with Iran, what are the big things? The Saudi Arabian-Iranian restoring of ties. And why did that happen? So according to one of the leading institutes, the Washington Institute, why did Saudi Arabia go with its nemesis in Iran? Because the U.S. had no serious plans to stop Iran's nuclear progress. But this is a tactical shift. It is not a long-term strategic shift. These are still bitter rivals. Another leading American think tank, the Defense Foundation for Defense of Democracy, says the Turks, and we talked about trust, Americans need to understand that trust in this region, you can't do business unless you have trust, whether it's geopolitical or economic. The Saudis don't have trust of Washington, and China is becoming a major player of Middle East power. That's actually a picture of me in the West, with I think two of the three last Saudi ambassadors to Iran. So again, what for normalization with Israel? What do they want? They want security guarantees, a nuclear program of their own, and fewer restrictions. Now, from the Saudis' point of view, they're saying, how can you put any restrictions on us? You allowed what your State Department calls the leading state sponsor of terror, Iran, the right to enrich uranium. And we want to be friends with you, and you have restrictions on us. So they look at it as American hypocrisy. But to prove this is tactical, not strategic, this is a whole think tank. This, you can see my name in the front. I was speaking to the leaders of this think tank, and I said two of them were the former ambassadors from Saudi Arabia to Iran. The whole think tank is about Iran in Saudi Arabia. This will remain an adversary going forward. This is not changing things. Another big thing that will indirectly affect Turkey is Iran wants to buy the advanced Russian Su-35s, which are comparable to America's F-35s, not quite as good from what I understand, but very important. And they're building underground bases for them. And they also want and have been promised the S-400 system. And you can see again the tunnels. And this is from 2023 in February. Another part here of what's going on, and because Turkey in general, as being part of NATO, has American weapons, could be made less effective. What's happening right now is Russia is capturing in Ukraine American NATO weapons, sending them to Iran. They're being reverse engineered, which means that they can make things like the Javelin anti-tank system and the Stinger anti-aircraft system less effective. This is why Israel didn't want to send its very famous Iron Dome system there. They were worried that Russia get its hands on it, give it to Iran, and make Israel's defenses less. So the big question, this affects everybody in the region. Will Israel, like it did in 1981 in Osirak, strike the Iraqi nuclear program or the Syrian program in 2007? And there's something called from Menachem Begin, the Begin doctrine, preemption. You can never let an enemy country get to be a threshold, a nuclear weapon status. Will they act upon it? Israel takes the Ayatollah words very seriously. The words are again and again and again. It's part of the DNA of the Islamic Republic is the elimination of the Zionist entity. And here's a missile this year in Isfahan. In Hebrew, it's an Iranian missile talking about destroying Israel. And Israel's current head of Mossad says it is Mossad's promise that we will not let Iran have nuclear weapons. So let's turn this to Turkey and Iran. Again, not natural allies. Historically, there's been 11 wars. These are two major non-Arab Muslim countries. It's Sunni Shiite on a very superficial scale. They support different proxies in the Middle East. One thing they do agree upon, they both have issues with their Kurdish populations and the Kurds who are like the PKK, who are in Iraq and in Syria. But Iran permanently controlling Syria is not in Turkey's long-term interest. Would Turkey accept permanent Iranian control of much of Syria in exchange for ending Turkish refugee crisis of the millions of refugees who've swept up onto Turkish shores, so to speak, because of the Syrian civil war? That would be a long-term mistake. Turkey and Iran, as long as it's the current Islamic Republic, having them in Syria will cause more long-term problems than not. So I'm going to have a summary now of what I said, and now we're going to go to the questions. So Turkey needs to look at where its opportunities, both geopolitical and economic, and their security lie. It has to realize that America and Turkey have had really a bumpy road that has undermined, from an American perspective, trust in the relationship. It's up to Turkey at this point to have to manage the new geopolitical realities and work in coordination with America. For Turkish interests, for Western interests, that needs to go on. Now, there are legitimate grievances. The Europeans refused to incorporate Turkey into their economic structure, despite they having such strong economic relations. And Turkey does not understand American mentality of what's going on. And I'll have one slide of that just before we finish. And also the West's criticism of Turkey, whether it's on human rights, arresting of journalists, is going to continue, and it's got to be dealt with. And hopefully from an American perspective, that there could be some liberalization in what's going on there. So this is one of the reasons I advise businesses and governments, because investors, Wall Street, American industry, what they read in American papers is how they act on their investment decisions. From my point of view, for Turkish interests, for American interests, repairing the American-Turkish relationship is important for security and for economics. And America is cautiously optimistic that President Erdogan has now turned the page. So Turkey has a long and beautiful history dating back to antiquity. But balancing an independent course in a dangerous region, managing its most important security relationship, the United States, its most important relationship from economics with the EU, dealing with an unpredictable sanctioned Russia and an economically expansionist China, was going to require real attention and thoughtful decisions. And I want to help Turkey and America understand why they see the Middle East differently to advance both of their shared interests. And if anybody would like to contact me, Mandel Strategies for my advising and consulting, my email address is there, ermandelmd@gmail.com, or you can go to mandelstrategies.com. And I am ready for questions.
Thank you, Eric. It was a great presentation, actually. I just want to ask about the Biden administration's approach. So, what's the Biden administration's overall approach towards the Middle East, and how does it differ from the previous administration's policies?
So, both the Obama, the Trump, and the Biden administrations all wanted to leave the Middle East. America's a war-weary country after Iraq and Afghanistan, but the Middle East keeps pulling America back. So I counsel people in Washington and Congress that an American withdrawal from the region undermines American credibility, not just with its Middle East allies, but it reverberates around the world. In Taiwan, they hear it. America has a small footprint in places like Iraq or in Syria, and we get disproportionate influence. American foreign policy aid should increase. And I believe the Biden administration has come around to this point of view that America needs to be re-engaged. Being out is going to pull America back in and put American soldiers in harm's way again.
Okay, thank you. And another, by the way, if there is any question from the audience, it's welcome, always welcome into the Q&A box. And another question of mine is about the President Erdogan's leadership in the region. So how does the United States perceive the Turkish role in the region under Erdogan's leadership, and what impact does this have on the U.S.-Turkey relations?
So we have to be honest, this relationship between the United States and Turkey has been strained for many years. But both sides now want to lower the flames. But it can't be just for the short term. It's got to be for the long term. What America would like is Turkey to return to what it was in at least the American perception of what Turkey was. Oops, sorry, I apologize. What Turkey was in the 20th century, very pro-Western, the strongest part of NATO. Turkey, on the other hand, looks at itself differently under President Erdogan. It would like to be a balancing act, but for the Turkish economy, for Turkish security, beyond the short term, we know Turkey is where it is, and it has to deal with some very difficult adversaries, but the Turkish future still lies and needs to pivot more towards the West.
Great, thank you. There are some questions from the audience, and the first question is, in your perspective, what value and relevance did the Abraham Accord bring to the region?
So the Emiratis and Bahrain and Morocco have economically prospered. The relationships are strong. They're not perfect. At the same time that the UAE welcomes Israelis and they're doing amazing deals that has helped the economy, the Emiratis' number one trading partner in the region is with Iran. Five-dimensional chess, complex things. The Abraham Accords is a positive. Even though Israel and Turkey have relations, strong economics, it's not as strong as it should be. From a Turkish perspective, Israel is a first-rate technology company. It's a great place to invest and to work and to get Israelis to invest in Turkey. It's happening. It continues to happen. There is much potential that's there. I think the Abraham Accords is a template. Going ahead for the Saudis, I don't think they necessarily want to call it the Abraham Accords. I think there's a path to normalization that's going on. And I think many of those countries do not want to let the Palestinian issue be a veto for their economic interests. Turkey has to make some decisions because of its interests with the Palestinian issue. But I think it can work out. I think the relations of Turkey and Israel, especially on energy, but beyond it, need to increase. Also, Israelis love going to Turkey as tourists. That slowed at one point. That's a big part of helping the Turkish economy. Those two countries are, for many years, for the first 80 years of Turkey's first 100 years of modern Turkey, were incredibly close. They should come back there. It's in Turkish interest.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question is, in case the Trump is back to the office as a president, should we expect significant change in the Middle East policy?
Unknown. Um, President Trump, if he becomes president again, I was asked this question last night. It's possible. I don't want to go into the politics of it, but excuse me. He makes decisions on foreign policy that don't follow a conventional route. He is a transactional president. I'm not sure the quality of the people who would join his new administration because of the problems that are there. Listen, just in relation to President Trump, he was close with Erdogan, then he wasn't close with President Erdogan, then he was close. He was close with Putin, was not close with Putin. It's really hard. It's hard enough dealing with America, where dealing with the Western democracy of America, every 2, 4, and 6 years, we change our government and policies change. But having a president who seems to change all the time, at one point, he wanted to remove all American forces in northern Syria. It was talked out of it. I don't know. I think it puts a lot of uncertainty into the Middle East. And I wouldn't, there was an article I was told in the Wall Street Journal talking specifically by the Europeans. How do we deal with another Trump presidency? I don't know how you really plan for it other than to plan for it to being unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. We have 2 questions related to the trust issue between the countries. So the first question is what both countries should do to maintain a new trust between 2 countries. And don't you think the same mentality? No, the other question is that you mentioned how much trust is important in the region while you were talking about Saudi Arabia. Don't you think the same mentality applies to Turkey? And how do you think the Turkish trust concerns regarding the US could be solved?
So when I was in Saudi Arabia, they told me they felt disrespected and they felt they didn't trust the United States. There was plenty of issues I'm just using that as an analogy before we get to Turkey. But from America, there are Republicans and Democrats to say, bring up 9/11, Khashoggi, all those, issues again and again. But remember, we deal with common interests, not necessarily common values here. And common interest for America is to be closer to Saudi Arabia and for Saudi Arabia to be closer to America. Parallel for Turkey and America, a much stronger ally in many ways, from its NATO place, from being part straddling the West and the East. It is Turkish interest, as I said, to pivot to the West, but trust. Trust is, I think Blinken's statement, let's not sweep things under the rug. Let's say it as it is. So what would America want from Turkey? One of the things is they have been very upset, both Democrats and Republicans, that Turkey has given sanctuary to Hamas and allowed a Hamas leader to actually strategize in terrorism in the Levant, specifically in the West Bank. If Turkey, in an amazing gesture, decided to say, Hamas, you can't do that here anymore, go to another country and do that, that would build from the American side a tremendous amount of trust. Mm-hmm. I can tell you from an American side here, because of the bumpy road, I know the Turkish issues, especially of the 2016 coup, and the fact that the alleged leader of that still lives in Pennsylvania. But America remembers with Turkey that during the Iraqi and Afghanistani wars, that Erdogan was not helpful to America in facilitating those wars. So there's a lot of things there that we need not to sweep under the table, realize we had problems, we had mistakes. Let's map a path for the future. The path for the future, if we both agree, it's in both our interests for us to be stronger. And Turkey says, we do realize where we are, near Iran, near Russia, but we are going to tilt more to the West. America would be a bigger advocate on the Europeans in getting Turkey closer. And if Turkey, I think the key thing here that Turkey could do, and it's not easy, But I think that S-400 system, if America, I'm sure, would almost pay for it to go away and to bring in American and Western anti-missile systems, which are as good, maybe better. But even if it was better, it's not worth it for Turkey to have that S-400 missile system that's there. There are things from Turkish point of view, and I hate to say this, but I think that the Turkish leadership needs to take a couple of steps first, and I think America will reciprocate. Biden administration wants to.
Yeah. Another question is from UK. It's asking that I'm seeing Turkey increasingly seen as an acceptable country for difficult commercial negotiations to displace UAE. Do you see that, and how do you see the implications for the region?
Okay, so I'm going to give you another analogy. When I was in the Gulf, the Omanis and the Qataris were asked to be intermediaries with the bad guy Iran for a possible future, going back to some type of Iran deal. Qatar told me, we talked to the bad guys, and so we're helpful to you. Turkey has relations with Putin. Turkey has relations to a certain extent of Iran. Talking to them and aligning with them are two different things. America appreciates what Turkey does, like on grain deals. And I think Turkey plays an amazing role. But Turkey can't be a neutral player here, being the second largest part of NATO. Turkey still needs to be, you can be a mediator and you could be negotiating and have relations there, but it has to be known for the trust from America and Europe, UK included, obviously, that Turkey's home, security-wise and economics, is still in the West. So yes, I think Turkey could provide an amazing thing and maybe be the facilitator of ending the Russian-Ukraine war. And that would be incredibly appreciated, as long as it's not so balanced. It's not 50-50. Turkey needs to be 75-25 towards the West.
Mm-hmm. And I will ask about the two NATO ally countries from the US perspective. What do you think about Turkey and Greece balance in the region?
Listen, the Turkish-Greek relationship has had many problems. But from an American perspective, America wants to, and both are NATO members. From American perspective, America wants Turkey, Greece, Cyprus to work together. President Erdogan has made gestures already about decreased potential drilling for natural gas in contested, disputed areas around Cyprus, has lowered the tension there. I can't tell you what Turkish national interests should be, but from my perspective, from an economic perspective, the thing here is to work together in respect, if not always agreement, for your advancement, that Turkey becomes part of the energy infrastructure of the region and becomes an important player there. It's another reason for you choose your interests, if not always your shared perspective. Turkey and Greece and Cyprus and Israel and Italy and Egypt, and there's more of a rapprochement between Turkey and Egypt. We didn't even touch upon that. Is good for the region. It's good for the U.S.-Turkish relationship.
Okay. Another question is from a journalist. The question is, what's your take on the Turkish general public perception that the U.S. is losing its global appeal? What would you advise to answer that challenge?
So it gets back to the perception. Even though America is still, in a military sense, a unipolar superpower as far it is, it's why the seas remain open. The perception is America will not use its military strength, its military credibility to act. And that's one of the reasons Iran continues to take chances of what's going on. I think things are changing to a certain degree, maybe not enough. I'm a big believer that if people believe that you would have a red line and there is military force that you would use then you decrease the chance of war. I'll give you an example. America has soldiers in a place called Al-Tanf on the Syrian-Iraqi border. Iranian-sponsored militias have attacked American forces, and more times than not, we have not responded. That perception is America is weak and unpredictable. We need showing some strength will decrease the chances of a regional war. I do believe that's an American problem that will have to change. I think the Biden administration is coming a little more to realize that. I cannot tell you what a Trump administration would do in those situations.
So what do you think about China? How does China react on the current situation? Are there any signs for closer cooperation between Turkey and China from U.S. perspective?
So China wants to be in the Middle East. It doesn't want to be the security guarantor of what's going on. It wants to rely on America to make sure that the Persian Gulf stays open. The Chinese need all those fossil fuels that are coming through there, but China has had a long-term plan now through its Belt and Road Initiative to expand, and it has wrapped a number of nations into its claws, if you will, especially Pakistan, with loans they can never pay back. I would tell the Turkish government to be wary that they do not give things away for free. They're looking to undermine the U.S.-Turkish relationship. Listen, America is not ending its relationship with China, but it is ending it on dual-use technologies and AI and things like that. I think Turkey needs to be wary of what China wants to do. They have a lot to offer. They're a huge market. But again, to say I'm going to be neutral and totally here, you have to realize America's number one adversary for the 21st century is China. And if Turkey is perceived to be not favoring America over China or respecting America's national security interests, then that, just like with the S-400 in Russia, in the long term, that's going to undermine the Turkish economy.
And the another question from the audience is that what role do organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood, Arab League of States, and the OPEC have on the decisions of Turkey and its neighbors?
So, the perception in America is that President Erdogan is obviously sympathetic, if not ideologically simpatico, with the Muslim Brotherhood. America, on a strategic point, looks at the Muslim Brotherhood as the father of, if you will, Hamas and groups like that. America is wary about political Islamism. Obviously, Turkey, there are differences. America, again, looked at Turkey at what it was, the secular Turkey of its first 80 years, and now it looks at itself that Turkey is in stretching its wings, that its political Islamism is moving it away from the West. Can it be both? I think it needs for its own interest to be both. But if you are more religious from an Islamist point of view, obviously a Sunni Islamist point of view, I think it doesn't necessarily have to translate always into supporting other Muslim Brotherhood entities. We know about the situation of Morsi in Egypt, but I think right now, if I would counsel the Turkish government to distance itself from the Muslim Brotherhood Hamas. I think that's not going to be helpful for Turkey in the long run. That does not mean not helping the Palestinian people. There's two separate issues. I'm a big believer to empower the Palestinian people for self-sufficiency and to lower the regional tension and for them to work with Israel and other countries. Hamas is not the vehicle, and I think Turkey giving them sanctuary there is not in Turkish, certainly not in American interests.
Mm-hmm. There's a great question about the sanctions and returning the S-400 systems to Russia. And the question is, the U.S. had requested S-400 systems to be returned to Russia. And given the war in Ukraine, this may not be the best thing for the U.S. anymore. Do you foresee a change of this attitude and thus lifting of sanctions anytime soon? Because if Turkey returns back to the systems to Russia, it will be supporting Russia in the war in Ukraine.
I don't believe a return. I think the message, as opposed to the tactics of that they'll have another anti-missile system, is going to, say that's going to change the balance of the war. America is not forgetting about the S-400 system. I think what Turkey should do quietly, so nobody loses face here, is for President Erdogan to reach directly out to President Biden, foreign minister to foreign minister also, State Department to State Department, and say, we want to return it. What are you going to do for us so we're made economically whole here? Russia, despite their aggressive nature and Putin's rhetoric, is a failed economy with demographics going against itself. I was reading about its GDP for this war. It may be 10% is going to the war of already a country that was a disaster economically. If you think about what happened, what Reagan did in getting the Soviet Union to try to outspend the United States, it helped destroy the Soviet Union. It helped create the fall of the Soviet Union. Bleeding the Russian economy it helps the chance that Russia will be forced, under Putin or not, to not be as aggressive going forward. And Putin is obviously a lone wolf actor here and could do what he wants. But I'm very rarely binary, black and white. I believe in gray, but I think this is binary. Figure out a way to return the S-400 system, get America to help you pay for it, do it quietly, and get Turkey back. It will help Turkey in so many ways.
For the energy industry, what is the U.S. opinion and strategy, and also the recommendation for the Israel's gas?
So Israel has a few options to do because Israel's finding more and more reserves. Israel sends gas now, both for itself it uses, but to Egypt mainly, also to Jordan. Israel could increase, because it's expanding now, to Egypt. That's one possibility. Israel's best possibility for self-sufficiency is to create a giant liquefied natural gas plant. I don't think that's going to happen because Israeli environmentalists are fighting that tooth and nail. So I don't think that. So then it comes to putting pipelines underneath. The best, easiest pipeline is to Turkey. It gets back to that question. Israel is going to ask itself, with President Erdogan here for the foreseeable future and the problems that have happened over the last 20 years, can we trust Turkey to be our outlet for natural gas? From America's perspective, America would like Israel and Turkey to go back to what they were or close to it from an economic point of view and not threaten one another. America wants quiet and all the players there to play nicely with one another, and it wants to get all that gas out as quickly as possible to Europe to decrease the Russian influence. It won't replace it, but to decrease it. So I think there is a grand bargain here between President Erdogan and Prime Minister Netanyahu. But I have to say, from this part, the Turkish leadership has to show that we're not going to back out of this somewhere down the road over a political issue, most likely over either something happening on the Temple Mount or something happening with Hamas. I don't think that's in Turkish interest to be there and to be the guarantor of Hamas interests.
Mm-hmm. So I have two more questions. The first question is about America. What do you think the role of Turkey in Africa from U.S. perspective?
I didn't get the question. What is the role of Turkey in
Africa?
In Africa. So we're talking, so in the MENA, so North Africa. I look at Africa. It is really not my expertise, but obviously Egypt is in Africa, Algeria is in Africa, Libya is in Africa, so North Africa. people are, we have the horrific problems going on in Libya and Turkey and other allies and adversaries support and with different proxies of what's there. Egypt, which has 100 million people, is a basket case. Can you imagine that country falling and becoming what Syria became, more than 10 years ago? That region is very volatile. From a geopolitical point of view, I think Turkish rapprochement with Egypt is important. Obviously, there are different ways of looking at it, mainly over the Muslim Brotherhood and what happened in 2014 and the coup. But there are shared interests here, economic interests and political interests that should work. Libya, who knows what's going to happen? I don't see any resolution of what's there. When you go to sub-Saharan Africa and below, there's tremendous potential, but also tremendous poverty and situations there. I don't know enough about Turkey's interests below there, but I do know the Chinese have their eyes on that world. Just to tell you one little tidbit, the Chinese already have a military base in Djibouti, and they are looking to protect their fossil fuel interests, but not to replace America there. Africa is Northern Africa is intertwined. Again, there's nothing here that's separate. Everything interacts, whether it's through a proxy or whether it's through trade. But I would keep my eyes on Egypt as a country that's fragile, and you don't want that country going into chaos or a civil war.
Mm-hmm. And the last question is about the F-16. So what will it take for the US Congress to approve F-16 modernization and getting Turkey back on F-35 program? Do you see any chance?
Yes. Well, first of all, the F-16s, I think, are going to happen because of Turkish agreement about letting Sweden and Finland into NATO. So I think the F-16 part is going to happen. The F-35, I'll call it a quid pro quo. It's related to the S-400. I believe part of the deal Turkey will have, and I think America will reciprocate, is if you get rid of your S-400 system, I bet you get right back into that F-35 program and talk about helping Turkey from a economic and a security point of view. I mean, that is directly tied there are obviously other issues, but I think without getting rid of the S-400, I don't see Turkey getting back in the F-35 program.
Thank you very much, Eric. It was a great discussion on the US-Turkey relations. We hope that we will see you again on the same or the similar subjects. And I also would like to thank you to everyone who joined us today with the questions. There are still too many questions jumping into my box. So but the time is off. So I would like to thank everyone and happy to see you again.
By the way, people can reach out to me. They have my email address, crmandelmd@gmail.com. That's my personal address, and they can reach out for questions or if they're looking for consulting or advising services from Mandel Strategies.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you.